United States and the Soviet Union emerged from the Second World War as two superpowers, and what that means. And while both are vastly different, both nations are major players in the world events, and really still are today.
Give me a second, I need to get my story straight. My friends are in the bathroom getting higher than the Empire State. My lover, she's waiting for me just across the bar. My seat's been taken by some sunglasses, asking about a scar. And I know I gave it to you months ago. I know you're trying to forget, but between the drinks and subtle things, the holes in my apologies, you know, I'm trying hard to take it back. So if by the time the bar closes and you feel like falling down, I'll carry you home tonight. No, I know that I'm not all that you got.
First off, I want to talk about the differences here between the United States and the Soviet Union. Both are very different politically, economically, have different histories. And I guess first I want to look at the economic systems. So capitalism is a system based on the free exchange of goods and services. If Brennan has a talent that he can exploit to make a profit, he should. He should exploit that talent. He should make a profit, because if whatever he can do is in demand, that means it provides a service for someone else. That means it has a value that he can profit from and that others can profit from. And that mutual benefit of the free exchange in goods and services is what Adam Smith called the invisible hand, the self-regulating market of capitalism. The Soviet Union, meanwhile, is based on the history and the belief of Karl Marx that the very system of capitalism actually just funnels wealth and power into the hands of a very powerful few, and that history has shown class struggle to be the defining conflict of our time. And so the very poor in Russia rose up and killed the very powerful and seized that power from them and created a system called communism. And so the Soviet Union's existence is built on the hate and fear and struggle against the very system of capitalism. And so when Stalin announced that war between communism and democracy and capitalism was inevitable, that was the Cold War. And of course, political systems. So if communism is the ideal that Karl Marx hoped for, the ideal that the people would control the means of production, that private property would be distributed equally, that everyone would share in the new utopia of a classless society, the catch was that Brennan will not willingly give up that power. He won't. Karl Marx even said it, that the haves will never willingly give up to the have-nots, that it will require violent struggle. Ergo, communist nations have ended up as authoritarian, autocratic, even in some cases totalitarian regimes. Meanwhile, democracy is based on that free exchange of goods and services. If Luke wants to make movies and people want to buy them, great. If they don't want to buy them, he'll need to make something else. It's all up to him. So capitalism is all about that freedom. Democracy is all about, if you guys want to do something, then figure it out and do it. However, those are very different systems. And so when Stalin announced this war between capitalism and communism, when Churchill declared that an iron curtain has descended upon Europe, these are very concerning times. And not to mention the fact that, of course, once we exploded an atomic weapon in Hiroshima and then Nagasaki, we now hold the keys to potential global annihilation. And of course, we never told the Soviet Union about this, even though we were allied with them in the Second World War. Meanwhile, at the end of the Second World War, the United Nations became the international organization. It was to be what the League of Nations had promised to be. This new place where all countries in the world could be represented and work out their problems peacefully. However, what the UN has become, at least during the years of the Cold War, is a place in which the United States and the Soviet Union actually competed for influence and power. So when Franklin Delano Roosevelt died, I believe it was April 12th, just a month before Hitler committed suicide, of course, Harry Truman succeeded him as president. Truman had not even been told about the atomic bomb until he was made president. And by the way, Mr. President, we have a bomb that can blow up cities. Do you want to use it? And he had a tough decision to make, and he chose to use it. Now, after the war was over, a great conference was held with the leading powers in the world, at this time the United States, Great Britain, and Soviet Union. And the hope was that these nations would lead the world into a new, prosperous, and democratic society. But that was not the case. There were some that hoped this would lead to the formation of a world government, that hoped that the United Nations would actually become a global government and that we would have world peace. But no. For example, Stalin refused to give up the territories that he had taken during the Second World War. He had built an empire about as large as Nazi Europe. He refused to give up those territories. He refused to allow democratic elections in his countries. And so meanwhile, Harry Truman became convinced that the United States and the Soviet goals in the world were deeply at odds. So if the United States' goal is to protect and promote democracy around the world, the Soviet Union's goal is for communism to be a worldwide revolution. Karl Marx predicted a worldwide revolution, that the workers of the world would rise up and take power. And so these are deeply different goals. So meanwhile, the Soviet Union wanted vengeance against Germany. Remember that Russia lost more people at the hands of the Germans than any other country. And so they wanted reparations. They wanted to make Germany pay. And meanwhile, the United States emerged as the world's leading economic power, second only to the Soviet Union. But yet the Soviet Union had the largest military on earth. The only check on that large military was the atomic bomb. But to use the atomic bomb brought the threat of a third global conflict. But we have to understand that unlike the United States, where we were attacked at Pearl Harbor, where we lost about 2,400 Americans, where we went across the Atlantic Ocean and lost yet tens of thousands of American lives, the Russians lost tens of millions of their people at the hands of the Nazis. The suffering there is just incomparable. And so the Soviets actually hoped to make gains in the Second World War and installed communist rule in these satellite nations to provide a buffer against future invasions. And then this announcement of a war between these ideas was from 1946 forward. So what do you do about this? You can't just start bombing Moscow and bombing Kursk and Stalingrad. Using the atomic weapon could start World War III. So what do? Well, you can't just continue the war indefinitely. And so we adopted a policy of containment. These were measures created to prevent the spread of communism. And that's when Churchill gave the prophetic speech that from the Baltic to the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended upon Europe. So this policy of containment became known as the Truman Doctrine. And from this point forward, from 1945 all the way to 1991, there would be a Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. During these years, neither nation ever directly confronted the other on the battlefield. But yet we supported armed minorities and rebellions in hundreds of countries around the world. Any country that would resist the spread of communism, that would fight against Soviet encroachment, we would send aid. This committed us to Korea, to Vietnam, to Nicaragua, to Iran, to Egypt, to Lebanon, There were hundreds of nations that we committed ourselves to because of this policy. Not all were violent. In fact, for example, we used financial and diplomatic aid to rebuild the nations of Greece and Turkey, and this in fact prevented them from turning to communism. And the success in Greece and Turkey led us to expand this investment to 16 different nations in Western Europe. This is called the Marshall Plan. We spent as much money rebuilding Western Europe as we did on the New Deal. And this was hugely successful because by rebuilding these nations, by helping them become prosperous once more, it made communism less appealing. But yet, it was the Russians that invaded the city of Berlin, that took the city at the cost of 250,000 lives, took the city of Berlin. Remember, it was the Russian army that liberated the first death camps. It was the Russians that held much of Germany, including the city of Berlin. But yet, Germany was divided into two parts. There was East Germany, controlled by the Soviet Union, and there was West Germany, controlled by a coalition of the United States, France, and Great Britain. But the city of Berlin was within East Germany. But to complicate matters further, the city of Berlin was divided between East Berlin, controlled by the Soviets, and West Berlin, controlled by the democratic powers. And so in 1948, Stalin closed all highways, all transport, all trains into West Berlin. He was hoping to starve the people of West Berlin into submission, to win a battle in the Cold War without having to fight. And the first victory of the democratic powers was the Berlin airlift. That we flew in and dropped supplies in what was called the Berlin airlift into the city. And after about a year, Stalin lifted the blockade. It was becoming an embarrassment. And meanwhile, two Germanys emerged. West Germany, which would grow and thrive as a democracy. East Germany, which would remain under the sway of the Soviet Union. The United States formalized our first peacetime military alliance, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, also known as NATO. We are still a leading member of this alliance. It is the United States, Canada, Great Britain, 16 nations in total at its beginning. So here's a photograph of the Berlin airlift. These young people waiting for supplies which had to be dropped by airplane. All right, so that's all I got. Chapter 26, Section 2, and it's titled The Cold War Heats Up. And now after the Second World War, China became a communist nation. Korea split into two. Vietnam underwent a civil war we'll talk about later. And so this contest between communism and democracy was manifesting itself in different places around the world. And so the first place I want to talk about is China. Now, China was devastated in the Second World War. It's really hard to put in perspective. 20 million Chinese people died at the hands of the Japanese. The Japanese invaded China, did terrible things to them, massacred them, put them in horrible conditions. And after the war, the Chinese people were devastated. Millions had died, cities were destroyed, and the economy was in ruin. And the people were desperately poor. And so, what do people do when they're desperately poor and resources are so limited that starvation is a daily concern? They often turn to communism. Why? Because with limited resources, people will sometimes try to share those resources. It's a survival-based system. And so the communist movement was growing. And it was getting more and more support. Meanwhile, the functioning government of China was on the verge of collapse. It was called the Chinese Nationalist Government. Their leader was Chiang Kai-shek. Now, the United States supported the Chinese Nationalist Government, even though it was inefficient, it was corrupt, it was very unpopular, and the communist movement was growing. And the leader of the communist movement in China was Mao Zedong. Mao Zedong had the widespread popular support, particularly among the poor. Their army was called the Red Army, and it was growing by 1945, and the communists had controlled almost half of China by this time. This was a period of civil war. And so in the years of 1944 through to 47, the United States sent military aid to the nationalists to support Chiang Kai-shek and the nationalist army in fighting against communism. Mao Zedong's popular uprising was growing. People were flocking to the communist banner until finally the nationalists were losing and actually set up a government in exile on the island of Taiwan, which is still the situation in China today. How China is a communist nation, Taiwan is the Chinese nationalist government in exile. And so the Chinese people, Mao Zedong established the People's Republic of China. The United States refused to recognize the communist government of China. And that stayed in that particular awkward situation until Richard Nixon made a visit to China much later. The United States, meanwhile, was stunned. Now not only has Russia turned to communism, but China. And so two of the largest countries in the world have turned to communism. And so if you look at a map of red versus blue, because that's how many people saw it, blue representing the democratic countries of the world, red representing the communist nations of the world, there was this theory called monolithic communism, that all communists were working together. Now, the reality is far more complicated. The Soviets and Chinese often never trusted one another, but imagine how this would have been taken in the United States. And so, with China turning to the communist and invading the country of Tibet, as you just saw in the previous clip, the next nation to fall to communism was Korea. Korea is a close neighbor of China. Really, if you look at the map, it's a peninsula. It's been conquered by China in the past. It was evolved as an independent nation beginning years prior, centuries prior, with the Koryu dynasty. But after the Second World War, China sought to absorb Korea once more, or at least ally closely through communism. Now, after the war was over, Korea was divided into two parts along the 38th parallel. North of this would be North Korea and would surrender to the USSR, becoming communist North Korea, which is the situation today. In the south, South Korea, if you're familiar with that, surrendered to the United States and formed the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Now, in 1950, North Korea invaded the South, and this was the beginning of the Korean War. South Korea called for the United Nations to stop this, to send help. Please help us. North Korea is going to take us over. We don't want to be communist. And so the UN Security Council approved a joint coalition to defend the country of South Korea. General Douglas MacArthur, United States general in the Second World War, was put in command of the South Korean coalition of many other nations to defend the nation of South Korea. And so North Korea had driven south and captured almost the entire peninsula when MacArthur landed with coalition forces. And so the UN and South Korean troops were forced into just a small little piece of what was left of the Democratic Republic of South Korea. And so with the coalition, the Allied forces, MacArthur attacked the North Koreans from both sides, pushing through, liberating all of South Korea, and then took the fight to North Korea, invaded into North Korea. At this point, the Chinese army got involved and sent 200,000 Chinese soldiers into North Korea. And so the coalition forces led by Douglas MacArthur and the U.S. Army found themselves fighting a war not only with North Korea, but with China. And this went on for 2 years. Neither side can conclusively beat the other. And so meanwhile, we were at a bit of a stalemate. The U.S. Army could not beat North Korea and China. And MacArthur recommended the use of the atomic bomb. He said, we need to bomb North Korea. We need to bomb China. It's the only way that we are going to win this war. However, the Soviet Union and China had agreed to a mutual assistance pact. If we bomb China, the Soviet Union will declare war on the United States and we have World War III. The leading general of the United States, 5-star General Douglas MacArthur, in command of the war itself, recommended we nuke China. The fighting continued. Truman dismissed the idea of dropping the bomb on China. MacArthur continued to push for this. The president said no. Our 5-star general, and there's very few of these in American history, went directly to the American people and tried to push for American support for the nuking of China. As a result of this, President Truman fired Douglas MacArthur. He was outraged. And again, he tried to lead a public campaign against the president, saying this is the only way we're going to stop communism. We have to use the atomic bomb. Truman refused. And finally, in 1951, the Soviet Union suggested a ceasefire. An armistice was declared in 1953. A very tense truce was agreed upon. North Korea would remain communist. South Korea would remain a democracy. but it was a stalemate. And the tense truce endures until today. In fact, if you join the U.S. Army, it is one of the most likely places that you will be deployed is to the Korean border. We still maintain a large presence there. It is still one of the most heavily land-mined areas on the planet, and we still fear what could happen in North Korea. Section 3, and it's called the Cold War at Home. And so during the late 1940s, early 1950s, this fear of communism, led to a lot of reckless behavior, a lot of just extravagant charges against purely innocent people. And I want to start here with a clip from a movie called Equilibrium. And if you're a Christian Bale fan, this is one of his first movies. And it talks about a totalitarian society. Maybe the most classic example is George Orwell's 1984, but this is a lesser-known work that you might connect with, getting into a society where people's thoughts could be regulated if they were seen as seditious. And so I'll let the speaker in the first part of the clip introduce the reasons why these people believed they had to turn to this type of civilization. And then in the last part of the clip, you'll get to kind of the enforcement-related matters of what does it mean to police a people's thoughts.
Libria, I congratulate you. At last, peace reigns in the heart of man. At last, war is but a word whose meaning fades from our understanding. At last, we are whole. Librians, there is a disease in the heart of man. Its symptom is hate. Its symptom is anger. Its symptom is rage. Its symptom is war. The disease is human emotion. But Libria, I congratulate you, for there is a cure for this disease. At the cost of the dizzying highs of human emotion, we have suppressed its abysmal lows. And you, as a society, have embraced this cure. Prosium. Now we are at peace with ourselves, and humankind is one. War is gone. Hate, a memory. We are our own conscience now. And it is this conscience that guides us to rate EC10 for emotional content. All those things that might tempt us to feel again and destroy them. Librians, you have won! Against all odds and your own natures, you have survived!
Every time we come from the Nethers to the city, reminds me why we do what we do.
It does?
I beg your pardon?
It does.
EC10, condemned. 7 works of two-dimensional, illustrated material. 7 discs of musical content. 20 interactive strategy computer programs.
7 works of two-dimensional, illustrated material.
Thank you for coming, cleric. I assume you know who I am.
Yes, sir, of course. You are Vice Consul DuPont of the Third Conciliary of the Tetragrammaton. Father's voice.
Quite frankly, cleric, I am told that you were very nearly a prodigal student, knowing almost instantly if someone is feeling...
I have a good record, sir.
Why do you imagine that is, cleric?
I'm not sure, Vice Consul. Somehow, I'm able, on some level, to sense how an offender thinks, to put myself in their position.
If you had ceased your interval, if you were a sense offender.
I suppose you could say that, sir.
You're a family man, cleric.
Yes, sir, a boy and a girl. The boy's in the monastery himself, on path to becoming a cleric.
Good. And the mother?
My spouse was arrested and incinerated for sense offense 4 years ago, sir.
By yourself?
No, sir, by another.
How did you feel about that?
I'm sorry, I don't fully understand, sir.
How did you feel?
I didn't feel anything.
Really? How is it that you came to miss it?
I've asked myself that same question, sir. I don't know.
A nearly unforgivable lapse, cleric. I trust you'll be more vigilant in the future.
Yes, sir. Every time we come from the Nethers to the city, reminds me why we do what we do.
Does.
Every time we come from the Nethers to the city, reminds me why we do what we do.
Does. Does.
Prosecutorial evidence for ANR 136890. I need it. It was late this afternoon, may not have showed up in the records yet.
Very sorry, cleric. Nothing has been logged and nothing is pending under that entry.
It was an item of evidence brought in personally by Grammaton Errol Partridge. Check again.
Sir, Cleric Partridge has not entered anything in for weeks.
You're mistaken. It was a book of some kind.
Cleric. There's nothing.
Thank you.
He's been passing through the gate into the Nether every night for the last 2 weeks. We assumed it was enforcement related.
You always knew. But I, being poor, I've only my dreams. I've spread my dreams under your feet. Tread softly, because you tread on my dreams. I assume you dream, Preston.
I'll do what I can to see they go easy on you.
We both know they never go easy.
Then I'm sorry.
No, you're not. You don't even know the meaning. It's just a vestigial word for a feeling you've never felt. Don't you see, Preston? It's gone. Everything that makes us what we are traded away.
There's no war. No murder.
What is it you think we do?
No. You've been with me. You've seen how it can be. The jealousy. The rage.
A heavy cost. I paid gladly.
Now, that was just one example of what a country under communism could look like. And there were many reasons to fear. I mean, the Soviet Union, at the cost of tens of millions, had turned to communism. China turned to communism. And it seemed to be spreading. North Korea, North Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia on the brink. And yet, in the United States, there were 100,000 members of the U.S. Communist Party. And there was this fear that all communists were somehow in league because Karl Marx's vision of a worldwide revolution. And the concern was that this was somehow being led from the Soviet Union, that all communists were somehow loyal to the USSR, including potentially those in the United States. The President of the United States was accused of being soft on communism when nations like China and Korea were allowed to fall under its sway. And so he established federal employee loyalty programs. 3.2 million American federal workers were investigated, questioned, with no reason or suspicion of their ties to the Communist Party, but merely because they were workers within the federal government. And so of the millions who were investigated, 212, only 212 were even dismissed. Very few people were actually convicted or proved to be of any association, but yet people were being investigated and made to submit to loyalty questionnaires. Another great example is the House Un-American Activities Committee. This group investigated communist ties in the movie industry. I want to give a modern example. If James Cameron made Avatar in 1953, he would have been questioned before the House Un-American Activities Committee. Why? Because the enemy was a capitalist corporation. The heroes were a communal society fighting against a capitalist company seeking to make profits. That could be interpreted as communist propaganda. James Cameron would have been potentially questioned under the House Un-American Activities Committee for possible communist influence in their films. Many people testified. Gary Cooper testified naming names. Richard Nixon was an actor at that time, testified naming names. But there were 10 workers in the film industry, famously the Hollywood 10, who refused to cooperate. And I've got a clip from a movie called The Majestic to show you at the end of a kind of dramatic recreation of one of these actors who refused to cooperate. They claimed that to be forced to testify for someone's ideas was a violation of free speech. But what happened to these people for standing up to the federal government for what they felt was a constitutional issue? They were blacklisted, meaning they were never allowed to work in the film industry ever again. The next example, I wouldn't believe it if I didn't know this had happened multiple times throughout our country's history. The McCarran Act made it unlawful to gather, to plan an action that might lead to totalitarianism. Do you know what this does? It makes it unlawful in the United States to think about an idea, to talk about an idea that might lead down a dark path. Really? The President of the United States, Harry Truman, said this was a violation of free thought. And so he vetoed it. Congress overrode his veto. That's just how afraid people were. That's how scared. And that's a classic reaction. But again, have we seen this before? The Alien and Sedition Acts, the Espionage and Sedition Acts, Lincoln's suspension of habeas corpus. We've seen this over and over. It's a classic response to fear. Why might people be afraid? Well, I've got a few examples for you. I want to start with Alger Hiss. Was accused of spying for the Soviet Union. He claimed that he had no such ties to communism. He claimed, of course, that he was not engaged in acts of espionage, and he was caught, and he was convicted of perjury. Now, it led many to question, was this conviction fair? Was it just? Meanwhile, Richard Nixon made his career into the political spotlight for pursuing these charges against Alger Hiss. The next case I want to bring up is the Rosenbergs. In 1949, the Soviet Union tested its first atomic weapon 4 years after the United States had developed one. I mean, even our best projections had the Soviet Union about a decade behind us in the atomic technology. So how did they pull it off? There were spies among us. Noted physicist Klaus Fuchs admitted to leaking information about the atomic bomb to Soviet physicists. He was caught and convicted for spying against the United States. We had proof there were spies among us. Again, reasons to be afraid. But what we're talking about today is what effect can that fear have? There was a young couple named Ethel and Julius Rosenberg, minor members of the Communist Party, small activists. I mean, it's the equivalent of being part of a college club. They were implicated. They were charged with leaking information to the Soviets, and based on nothing more than circumstantial evidence, they were sentenced to death. There was a worldwide outcry against their execution. Publications around the world were saying, let the Rosenbergs go. There's no proof of their guilt. The United States Supreme Court upheld the conviction, and this young couple, with no more than hearsay against them, was executed. Why might things like this happen? There are those among us who stand to profit from fear, who use fear to gain fame and power for themselves. And maybe the most classic example of this is the Senator Joseph McCarthy. He was a rather ineffective legislator. He probably wasn't going to win re-election, and he needed something, some issue to help him gain power and fame for himself. And so he began to attack suspected communists. With or without evidence, it didn't matter. He played on the public fears. He gave this impression that he was some great hero purging the nation of this menace of communism. No one would speak against him because all he had to do was say, "You're a communist." And their career would be over, their reputation tarnished. He began to claim that there were communists in the State Department. Why is communism spreading? Because the State Department is doing nothing about it. Why are they doing nothing? Well, they must be communists too. People were afraid. People within his own party were afraid to speak out against him. Why? Because he might call them a communist. He might ruin their reputation too. Now, he went too far. In 1954, he began to accuse members of the United States Army of being communist. And in these televised hearings, it was very apparent that McCarthy was bullying and badgering witnesses, that he had no real evidence to support any of these allegations. The public began to turn against him. And now McCarthy's name is a byword for a witch hunt without evidence. Eventually, the Senate condemned him for improper conduct, and he was disgraced. Some towns went so far as to forbid speech that might favor the violent overthrow of the government. Millions of people were forced to take oaths, loyalty oaths. And I want to give you an example. Every morning we say the Pledge of Allegiance. Included in the Pledge of Allegiance is the phrase, "One nation under God." Do you know when that was added to the Pledge of Allegiance? It was in the 1950s. The early 1950s, in fact. Why? Because, well, communism is a secular worldview. It's a system based on the separation of church and state, because it seeks to improve one's position in the world here and now. Well, we also enjoy a celebration of church and state in the United States, and we feel that is very important, right? But yet, the nation under God was added to the pledge during the Red Scare. Because of this idea, this belief that we could somehow view Americanism as a Christian ideology and communism as an atheist belief system, and that we could pit the two between and against one another. Of course, what's on our money? In God we trust. When was that added? Very similar time period. What was the original motto of the United States? E pluribus unum, out of the many, one. That's our nation's motto. But what's the common response when I ask people what's our nation's motto? In God we trust. When was that added? Again, these points are propaganda to try to make it us versus them. And what's the effect of this? Is that people become afraid to speak out on public issues. And so I've got an example here. This is Jim Carrey is going to lay it down for us.
I'm sorry. But it occurs to me that there's a bigger issue here today than whether or not I'm a communist.
Bigger issue? Mr. Appleton, there is no bigger issue.
Actually, not to be contrary, I think there is. Gosh, I don't quite know what to say here. The fact is, I've never been a man of great conviction. I never saw the percentage in it. And quite frankly, I suppose I lack the courage. See, I'm not like Luke Trimble. He had the market cornered on those things. I never met the guy, but I feel like I've gotten to know him. And the thing is, I can't help wondering what he'd say if he were standing here right now. You know, I think he'd probably tell you. The America represented in this room is not the America he died defending. I think he'd tell you your America is bitter and cruel and small.
The chamber will come to order.
I know for a fact his America was big. Bigger than you can imagine. With a wide open heart. Where every person has a voice.
You are out of order,
even
sir.
If you don't like what they have to say.
Enough, sir. You are out of order.
If he were here, I wonder how you'd respond. if you could explain to him what happened to his America.
Mr. Appleton, you are skating on the very thin edge of contempt.
Well, that's the first thing I've heard today that I completely agree with.
Mr. Chairman, my client is clearly under an enormous strain as a direct result of the belligerent questioning of Mr. Clyde, and he is therefore not responsible for his comments. At this time, we wish to invoke the Fifth Amendment.
No, we don't.
Yes, Pete, we do.
No, Kevin, we don't. So knock it off! Shut the hell up and let me get through this. The Fifth Amendment is out of the question. But there is another amendment that I'd like to invoke. I wonder if anyone here is familiar with it. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion.
Mr. Appleton, you're out of order,
Congress shall make no law respecting
The chamber will come to order, Mr. Appleton.
an establishment of religion
You're out of
or
order.
prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or of the right of the people peaceably to assemble and petition the government for a redress of grievances.
You will not presume to lecture this committee,
That's the
sir.
First Amendment, Mr. Chairman. It's everything we're about, if only we'd live up to it.
Let him talk. He's just hanging himself.
It's the most important part of the contract every citizen has with this country. And even though these contracts, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, even though they're just pieces of paper with signatures on them, they're the only contracts we have that are most definitely not subject to renegotiation. Not by you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Appleton.
Not by you, Mr. Clyde.
You will stand down, sir.
Not by anyone. Ever. Too many people have paid for this contract in blood.
Enough, sir. You are out of order.
People like Luke Trimble. And all the sons of Lawson, California.
Damn right. And they deserve better than this. All you boys do.
I will have order, or I will clear this chamber.
All right, guys. So today we're going to talk about Chapter 26, Section 4, and it's titled "Two Nations Living on the Edge," because during the 1950s, both the United States and the Soviet Union had to grapple with the idea that total war between the two nations could lead to nuclear war. And so I want to start with a clip that's famous from the Civil Defense Corporation, or Civil Defense Agency, or Administration, excuse me, preparing young students for drills in the event of an atomic fallout. So here we go. This is a famous duck and cover video.
Dum, diddle dum dum, diddle dum dum, diddle dum dum. There was a turtle by the name of Bert, and Bert the turtle was very alert. When danger threatened him, he never got hurt. He knew just what to do. He ducked and covered, ducked and covered. He did what we all must learn to do. You and you and you and you duck and cover.
Be sure and remember what Bert the Turtle just did, friends, because every one of us must remember to do the same thing. That's what this film is all about. Duck and cover. This is an official civil defense film produced in cooperation with the Federal Civil Defense Administration and in consultation with the Safety Commission of the National Education Association. Produced by Archer Productions, Incorporated. Hey, Bert, come on out and meet all these nice people, please. Oh, all right. We really can't blame you. You see, Bert is a very, very careful fellow. When there's danger, this is the way he keeps from being hurt. Sometimes it even saves his life. That's why these children are practicing to duck and cover just as you do in your school. We all know the atomic bomb is very dangerous. Since it may be used against us, We must get ready for it, just as we are ready for many other dangers that are around us all the time. Fire is a danger. It can burn whole buildings if someone is careless. But we are ready for fires. We have a fine fire department to put out the fire, and you have fire drills in your school so you know what to do. Automobiles can be dangerous, too. They sometimes cause bad accidents, but we are ready. We have safety rules that car drivers and people who are walking must obey. Now, we must be ready for a new danger, the atomic bomb. First, you'll have to know what happens when an atomic bomb explodes. You will know when it comes. We hope it never comes, but we must get ready. It looks something like this. There is a bright flash, brighter than the sun, brighter than anything you've ever seen. If you were not ready and did not know what to do, it could hurt you in different ways. It could knock you down hard or throw you against a tree or a wall. It is such a big explosion, it can smash in buildings and knock signboards over and break windows all over town. But if you duck and cover like Bert, you will be much safer. You know how bad sunburn can feel. The atomic bomb flash could burn you worse than a terrible sunburn, especially where you're not covered. Now, you and I don't have shells to crawl into like Bert the Turtle, so we have to cover up in our own way. First, you duck, and then you cover. And very tightly, you cover the back of your neck and your face. Duck and cover underneath a table or desk or anything else close by. In Betty's school, they are talking about the atomic bomb, too. Betty is asking her teacher, how can we tell when the atomic bomb may explode? And her teacher is explaining that there are two kinds of attack, with warning and without any warning. We think that most of the time we will be warned before the bomb explodes, so there will be time for us to get into our homes, schools, or some other safe place. Our civil defense workers and our men in uniform will do everything they can to warn us before enemy planes can bring a bomb near us. You may be in your schoolyard playing when the signal comes. That signal means to stop whatever you are doing and get to the nearest safe place fast. Always remember, the flash of an atomic bomb can come at any time, no matter where you may be. You might be out playing at home when the warning comes. Then be sure to get into the house fast, where your parents have fixed a safe place for you to go. If you are not close to home when you hear the warning, go to the nearest safe cover. Know where you are to go, or ask an older person to help you. You know the places marked with the S sign? They're safe places to go when you hear the alarm. If there is a warning, you will hear it before the bomb explodes. But sometimes, and this is very, very important, sometimes the bomb might explode without any warning. Then the first thing we would know about it would be the flash. And that means duck and cover fast, wherever you are. There's no time to look around or wait. Be like Bert. When there is a flash, duck and cover, and do it fast. Here are some older boys showing what to do if the flash comes when you are not in the classroom. This is what to do if you should be in a corridor. You duck and cover tight against the wall this way. Remember to keep your face and the back of your neck covered tightly. Try to fall away from windows or doors with glass in them. Then, if the glass breaks and flies through the air, it won't cut you. You might be eating your lunch when the flash comes. Duck and cover under the table. Then, if the explosion makes anything in the room fall down, it can't fall on you. Getting ready means we will all have to be able to take care of ourselves. The bomb might explode when there are no grown-ups near. Paul and Patty know this, and they're always ready to take care of themselves. Here they are on their way to school on a beautiful spring day. But no matter where they go or what they do, they always try to remember what to do if the atom bomb explodes right then. It's a bomb. Duck and cover. Paul and Patty know what to do. Paul covered the back of his head so that he wouldn't be burned, and Patty covered herself with the coat she was carrying. They knew how to duck and cover. They acted right away when the flash came. If they had been at this doorway when the bomb flashed, Paul and Patty would have ducked and covered this way. like this girl. Heavy doorways are a good place to duck and cover. She will be safer, too. Here's Tony going to his Cub Scout meeting. Tony knows the bomb can explode any time of the year, day or night. He is ready for it. Duck and cover. Attaboy, Tony. That flash means act fast. Tony knows that it helps to get to any kind of cover. This wall was close by, so that's where he ducked and covered. Tony knew what to do. Notice how he keeps from moving or from getting up and running? He stays down until he is sure the danger is over. The man helping Tony is a civil defense worker. His job is to help protect us when there is danger of the atomic bomb. We must obey the civil defense worker. We must know how to duck and cover in the school bus or in any other bus or streetcar. Duck and cover. Don't wait. Duck away from the windows fast. The glass may break and fly through the air and cut you. Sundays, holidays, vacation time, we must be ready every day, all the time, to do the right thing if the atomic bomb explodes. Duck and cover. This family knows what to do, just as your own family should. They know that even a thin cloth helps protect them. Even a newspaper can save you from a bad burn. But the most important thing of all is to duck and cover yourself, especially where your clothes do not cover you. No matter where we live, in the city or the country, we must be ready all the time for the atomic bomb. Duck and cover. That's the first thing to do. Duck and cover. The next important thing to do after that is to stay covered until the danger is over. Yes, we must all get ready now so we know how to save ourselves if the atomic bomb ever explodes near us. If you do not know just what to do, ask your teacher when this film is over. Discuss what you could do in different places if a bomb explodes. Older people will help us as they always do, but there might not be any grown-ups around when the bomb explodes. Then, you're on your own.
Remember what to do, friends. Now tell me right out loud. What are you supposed to do when you see the flash?
So, the hydrogen bomb was unlike any other atomic weapon that had been developed. It gives a nation with this type of weapon the potential to destroy not just a city, but multiple hydrogen bombs used in conjunction could actually level or depopulate a country. And this is really scary stuff. We were the first to test a hydrogen bomb in 1952, but the Soviets had one a year later. And so you're watching a video here of what could happen. And of course, students are being taught to prepare for this, but the hydrogen bomb brought about a new possibility, unlike anything that we'd seen before. So, we're talking about a real cataclysmic fallout level event here. And so this brings up our first policy point, that of brinkmanship. Brinkmanship is the willingness to risk nuclear war to prevent the spread of communism. I mean, it is that type of standoff where you walk into a room with a hand grenade with the willingness to use it on yourself and the enemy if necessary. That's brinkmanship. Secretary of State John Foster Dulles, under Dwight D. Eisenhower, recommended that we pursue a policy of brinkmanship against the Soviet Union, meaning that we were willing to risk nuclear war. But unlike the use of atomic weapons in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, those killed 100,000 and 80,000 respectively, these could kill millions. This could be a global event, when you think of the fallout and the nuclear winter that could result. And so we had to develop methods to fight limited engagements. And that's where the Central Intelligence Agency, also known as the CIA, comes in. The CIA was famous for using spies around the world to gather information and also to influence political events. I want to give you two of the most famous cases here. The Prime Minister of Iran was sympathetic to the communist movements going on in his country. Iran had been devastated in the Second World War and was suffering and was impoverished. And remember, we talked about communism as kind of a classic emergency resort, a method considered when a country is in a desperate state. And so Iran was considering this, and the prime minister was sympathetic to those ideas. And so the CIA went in and got rid of this person. We actually removed a head of state and replaced him with the Shah. And the Shah was an autocratic dictator who ruled with an iron fist for 20 years with the support of the United States. In fact, when a popular uprising in Iran led by Ayatollah Khomeini, a Muslim cleric, was seeking to kill the Shah, President Jimmy Carter helped the Shah escape and seek asylum in the United States. So that's one case of the CIA being used to influence global events without the use of nuclear weapons. Another was the CIA helped to get rid of the president of Guatemala, because Guatemala, as an impoverished country, was also considering transitioning to communism. And with the help of the United States, a military leader became dictator of Guatemala. And so in both these cases, we helped to replace somewhat democratic leaders with dictators purely because these people were willing to withstand the spread of communism. Now, Stalin died in 1953, and relations improved somewhat. He was replaced by a man named Nikita Khrushchev, and Khrushchev believed that peaceful coexistence could be possible between the United States and the Soviet Union, between communism and democracy. Now, as a result, relations got better. Khrushchev actually came to visit the United States. He went to a Yankees game. He got to throw the first pitch even. Eisenhower went to meet on multiple occasions with Khrushchev at Geneva and Switzerland. And even later presidents came to the Soviet Union. And so even throughout the Cold War, both the Soviets and the Americans are trying to figure out ways to work things out peacefully. But nonetheless, we were a part of a military alliance, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, who maintained a policy of collective security. To attack France would be to attack all of them. And, of course, the Soviet Union had their own military alliance called the Warsaw Pact. To attack the Ukraine would be to attack all of the Warsaw Pact. But like I said, these world leaders were trying to figure out ways to not have to resort to nuclear war. Even though the Soviets and the Americans had this capacity, neither side wanted to use this. And the Geneva Open Skies Summit was a great example. Eisenhower met the Soviets there and proposed the idea of an open skies policy among the two nations, where perhaps the Soviets would be willing to allow U.S. reconnaissance planes to fly over their airspace to keep an eye on what's happening there, and we would allow the same. With certain exceptions, no planes over the White House, so to speak, but as long as we could know what they're up to, they could know what we were up to. And that was rejected ultimately, but it was seen as a step. At least people were proposing something. I also wanted to give you an example here of where a poor nation was able to play both sides off of one another for their mutual benefit. This is kind of like, mom and dad are divorced and the kid gets double Christmas, right? Each parent's trying to one-up the other. And so, in this case, the leader of Egypt, Gamal Abdel Nasser, Nasser was famous throughout the 50s and 60s as trying to lead the Middle East into a conquest, kind of a united Arab front. He wanted to build a dam called the Aswan Dam, and it's going to be the largest dam in history, bigger even than the Hoover Dam. But he needed money, and so he approached the United States to seek funding, and we said no. And so then he approached the Soviet Union. And the Soviets said, sure, we'll help. In fact, we're going to help you transition into a communist country. We're going to provide financial and military support. And as a response, Israel, Britain, and France all sent troops to Egypt to stop the spread of communism. And a war broke out. It was called the Suez War. When these nations threatened to respond with military force, Egypt responded by closing off the Suez Canal. Now, Suez Canal was like the I-40 of this area. I mean, this is the major shipping route connecting the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean. In fact, as a result of this, the Eisenhower Doctrine was established. The Eisenhower Doctrine was a policy statement where any attack from a communist country into the nation of the Middle East could result in U.S. involvement in the Middle East. Basically,
at dawn on November the 4th, 1956, 1,000 Soviet tanks swept into the center of Budapest to put down a revolt that had brought hope, freedom, and a new style of government to the people of Hungary. The rise against Soviet rule had begun some weeks earlier. Ordinary citizens had taken up arms to fight the occupying forces in a bid to free themselves from Moscow's domination and from a government at home that was as oppressive as its Soviet paymasters.
It all goes back to Eisenhower and the concern about stopping communism. But there is an exception. That's the Hungarian uprising.
For the first time since the communist takeover at the end of the Second World War, the Hungarian national flag was openly on display. Partisans were joined by elements of the Hungarian army, and when they weren't fighting alongside, the soldiers often handed over their weapons to the new revolutionaries, even tanks. The Hungarian government was forced to start negotiations for the withdrawal of Soviet troops and began to admit publicly that it had made serious mistakes in the past. Democratization would begin at once. The Prime Minister Imre Nagy also promised to reform the political system to allow all democratic forces on the broadest basis. No one in Moscow is going to allow that. Even as a Hungarian general was negotiating the withdrawal of Soviet troops from Budapest, plans for a full-scale attack on the rebels were being drawn up in Moscow. The velvet glove was about to be removed from the iron fist. The brutalities of that fateful day, as well as bringing dissident Hungarians to heel, caused chaos among communists in the West. Thousands of party members tore up their cards in protest. Even hardliners who'd obeyed the Kremlin line through all its twists and turns over the years couldn't stomach the way Moscow had crushed the uprising.
Considering using the atomic bomb. We've already saw in the Korean War how General Douglas MacArthur,
the people of Hungary had to wait another 30 years for their freedom to be restored.
Atomic weapons against and so at what point would we consider, is there a line that could be drawn? Now, Nikita Khrushchev, as the new premier of the Soviet Union, favored a policy of peaceful coexistence, of scientific and economic competition. He believed that democracy and communism could coexist in the world, but that eventually one would outshine the other. And he believed this could be demonstrated in the classroom. It could be proven in economics or in scientific achievements. For example, in October of 1957, the Soviets sent the first artificial satellite to space, Sputnik. And of course, as a result, what did we do? We poured money into NASA. Kennedy stood up in front of the American people when he was inaugurated in 1960 and said, we're going to the moon. In 10 years, we will go to the moon. What did we do in 1969? We went to the moon. Why? Because we had to beat the Soviets. It was a field that we could compete in where no one had to die. But of course, we're still in a Cold War. And one example of this I wanted to give is the U-2 spy plane. The U-2 spy plane gave us the ability to fly and surveillance Russia without getting caught. These planes could fly so high in the stratosphere that they were above normal radar's ability to detect them. And there was a concern that Soviet detection technology was catching up, that it was a matter of time before one of these got shot down. And while the president was on the way to a summit to meet with Khrushchev, one of these planes was shot down. The pilot, Francis Gary Powers, survived the crash. It's a wonder, shot down from the stratosphere, managed to eject and survive, and was captured by the Soviet Union. And while the president denied this event and said, I have no knowledge of this pilot, they put him in the camera. Then he said, oh, well, it was a weather mission gone bad. And they had his confession. And it was a major embarrassment. And the failure of this U-2 incident, as it was called, renewed tensions between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. And this is always one of those what-if scenarios. What if the U-2 spy plane had never been shot down? Could the Cold War have come to a peaceful resolution decades ahead of where it wound up? Would there have been a Vietnam, maybe? I suppose we'll never know.
And cover. We have good morning class. My name is Mr. Witt, and I'm here to talk to you today about duck and cover and how this relates to shark attack safety as well as fire safety. Now, in the following video, we have two examples of how duck and cover can be used to escape a fire as well as a shark attack. I think you'll find this to be a very practical and safe approach in both situations. Thank you very much. So look at Erin doing her homework. Isn't she such a good student? Oh wait, what's that sound? Is it the fire drill? Erin knows exactly what to do. She's a good student. Yes, that's right, kids. She's ducking and covering. Oh, here comes Bobby. Yeah, he's a good student. Checking the water first. Yes, that's right. Checking. Oh, is it too cold? Oh, yeah. Better have your goggles on, Bobby. That's right. Now we're ready to swim. Now, as Bobby's splashing around. Oh, it's a shark. You better duck and cover. That's right, kids. That'll keep you safe. Maybe the shark didn't realize that duck and cover keeps you safe, but at least Bobby did. Oh, poor Bobby. Now today, kids, we learned about fire safety and about shark attack safety and what to do in each of those. And I think we showed clearly the principle of ducking and covering and how that can help in each setting. Thank you very much, and I hope you all have a great day.